He thought he could take my wife and get away with it. But when he did, he forgot one thing. I was the one who built everything he owned. This is a story about betrayal, about power, about the moment when the man who had everything learned what it feels like to lose it all, and about the architect who knew exactly which pillars to pull to bring the entire empire crashing down. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that hype button to boost this episode, and drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The Langford Group's 25th anniversary gala was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a place so expensive that even the silverware had pedigree. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across a ballroom filled with the city's elite, developers, investors, politicians, all dressed in their finest, drinking champagne that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week. Ryan Caldwell stood near the bar, watching the crowd with the detached observation of someone who'd been to too many of these events. At 37, he was senior architect at the firm, one of the trusted inner circle, the man who turned Daniel Langford's ambitious visions into structures that actually stood. He'd given 12 years to this company, 12 years of late nights, sacrificed weekends, missed birthdays, all in service of building someone else's empire. But tonight wasn't about work. Tonight was supposed to be celebration. Beside him stood his wife, Elena, 33, graceful in a way that seemed effortless, wearing a black dress that caught the light just right. She was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room, not because she demanded attention, but because she simply commanded it. Dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders. Her smile was warm but reserved, the smile of someone comfortable in rooms like this but not consumed by them. They'd been married for 9 years. 9 years that had started with passion and settled into something comfortable. Not bad, not broken, just routine. The kind of marriage where you stop noticing the small things because you assume they'll always be there. Ryan should have noticed the small things. The evening moved through its choreographed phases. Dinner was served, something French and overpriced. Speeches were given. Daniel Langford, 52 and commanding even in stillness, stood at the podium and spoke about vision, legacy, and the future. He was the kind of man who wore power like a second skin. Tailored suit, silver hair, a voice that filled rooms and made investors reach for their checkbooks. And none of this, Langford said, gesturing to the room. To the success, to the shining towers that bore his name across the city skyline, would be possible without the brilliant minds who bring my dreams into reality. Ryan Caldwell has been instrumental in our most significant projects. His dedication, his talent, his loyalty, these are the foundations upon which empires are built. The room applauded. Ryan nodded, acknowledging the recognition with the practiced humility of someone who'd received it before. Elena squeezed his hand, proud. But Ryan was watching Langford's eyes. And Langford's eyes weren't on him, they were on Elena. The evening continued. Jazz played softly from a quartet in the corner. People mingled, networked, made deals over dessert and cognac. Ryan found himself pulled into conversations about upcoming projects, zoning regulations, the new waterfront development that would reshape the harbor. He lost track of Elena for a while. She was somewhere in the crowd, being social, charming clients and their wives the way she always did at these events. She was good at this. Better than him, if he was honest. She knew how to make people feel important, how to laugh at the right moments, how to navigate the unspoken hierarchies of rooms like this. It was nearly 10 when Ryan saw them. He'd stepped away from a conversation about steel imports to get another drink, and that's when he spotted them through the crowd. Elena and Langford, standing on the balcony beyond the glass doors, and alone. The balcony overlooked the city, a panorama of lights stretching to the horizon. Romantic, if you were with the right person. Dangerous, if you were with the wrong one. Ryan moved closer, not approaching, just observing. Through the glass, he could see Langford standing too close. Could see his hand resting on the small of Elena's back, fingers spread in a gesture that was far too familiar, far too possessive. Elena's body language was harder to read. She wasn't pulling away, but she wasn't leaning in either. She was smiling, shy, nervous, the kind of smile Ryan hadn't seen on her face in years. The kind of smile she used to give him when they were first dating, when everything was new and electric and dangerous in the best way. Langford leaned in, said something Ryan couldn't hear. Elena laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that carried through the glass, and Ryan felt something cold settle into his chest. He told himself it was nothing. Langford was her boss too. She worked in the firm's marketing division, handled client relations, organized events like this one. They had to talk. They had to work together. A hand on the back, a private conversation. It didn't mean anything. But the cold feeling didn't go away. He watched for another minute, saw Langford's hand slide slightly lower on her back, saw Elena glance back toward the ballroom, toward where she'd left Ryan, a flicker of something. Guilt? Excitement? Crossing her face before she turned back to Langford. Then someone called Ryan's name, pulling him into another conversation, and when he looked back at the balcony, they were gone. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Ryan smiled at the right times, shook the right hands, said the right things. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying that moment on the balcony, dissecting every gesture, every expression, looking for meaning in the gaps between what he saw and what he feared. They drove home in silence. Elena seemed distant, distracted, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "You okay?" Ryan asked. "Yeah, just tired. Long night." "You and Langford looked like you were having a good conversation on the balcony." He said it casually, testing the waters. Elena's shoulders tensed, just slightly, just for a moment. "Oh, that? Yeah, he was just talking about the new campaign strategy. Boring work stuff." Looked pretty intense for boring work stuff. She turned to him, eyebrows raised, defensive. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just an observation." "Are you seriously doing this right now, at midnight, after a work event? You're going to start interrogating me?" "I'm not interrogating you. You're being paranoid, Ryan. Daniel is our boss. We work together, that's all." "Daniel." She called him Daniel, not Mr. Langford, not Langford. Daniel. The cold feeling in Ryan's chest deepened, spreading like frost across a window. "Right," he said. "Of course." They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they got home, Elena went straight to bed. Ryan stayed up, sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing, thinking about everything. He told himself it was nothing, that he was reading too much into a simple interaction, that trust meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. But deep down, in the part of his mind that deals in pattern recognition and structural integrity, the part that had built a career on understanding how things fit together and where the weak points are, he already knew. Some betrayals start long before the first kiss, and the foundation of his marriage had just developed its first crack. Over the next 3 weeks, the crack widened, small things at first, subtle shifts in the architecture of their life together. The kind of changes you might miss if you weren't looking for them, but once you started noticing, you couldn't stop. Elena started staying late at work. Not every night, but 2-3 times a week. Client presentations, she'd say. Campaign reviews. Strategy meetings that ran long. Always with an explanation. Always reasonable. Always delivered with just enough irritation at having to explain herself that Ryan felt guilty for asking. She started dressing differently. Not dramatically, nothing that would raise obvious questions, but the details changed. New perfume, something expensive, sophisticated, nothing like the vanilla and jasmine she'd worn for years. Lingerie that appeared in her drawer, lace and silk in shades she'd never bought before. Makeup applied with more care on the mornings of late meetings. Her phone became a constant companion. She carried it everywhere, to the bathroom, to the kitchen, even to bed, which she'd never done before. It was always face down now, always locked, and she'd developed a habit of tilting the screen away whenever a notification appeared, that subtle shift of the wrist that screamed secrecy. The intimacy between them evaporated like water on hot stone. They stopped having sex. At first, Elena claimed exhaustion. Work was demanding, she was stressed, she just needed some time to decompress. Ryan understood. He'd been there. He gave her space. But then the excuses multiplied. Headaches, early meetings, late meetings, she was on her period, she just wasn't in the mood. Maybe tomorrow, maybe this weekend, maybe when things settled down at work. Always maybe, never yes. The kisses became perfunctory. Quick pecks hello and goodbye, delivered with the same emotional investment as checking an item off a to-do list. The way you kiss your grandmother at Thanksgiving, not the way you kiss your wife of 9 years. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the electric bill? We need milk. Your mother called. No stories, no laughter, no shared moments of connection, just the administrative necessities of cohabitation. Ryan felt like he was living with a stranger wearing his wife's face. One Wednesday night, Ryan came home early from a site inspection that finished ahead of schedule. The house was quiet. Elena's car was in the driveway, which surprised him. She'd texted earlier saying she'd be at the office until 9. He found her in the bedroom, fresh from the shower, wearing a robe, her hair still damp. Her phone was on the nightstand, and as he walked in, it lit up with a notification. Elena lunged for it, snatching it away with a speed that betrayed panic. But not before Ryan saw the name on the screen. L, and the message preview. I can't stop thinking about you. The room went silent, except for the sound of water still dripping in the bathroom. "Who's Elle?" Ryan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Elena's face cycled through emotions in rapid succession: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally indignation. "Are you reading my messages now?" "It was on the screen. I saw it. Who's Elle?" "It's nobody, just a friend." "What friend? Since when do we have friends who text, 'I can't stop thinking about you'?" "It's taken out of context. You don't understand?" "Then help me understand. Who is it?" Elena stood up, pulling her robe tighter, defensive. "His name is Lorenzo. He's a photographer I'm working with on the new marketing campaign. We've become friends, that's all. The message is probably about the photo shoot, about the concepts we were discussing. You're twisting it into something it's not." Ryan stared at her. Every word sounded rehearsed. Every explanation felt like it had been prepared in advance, waiting for exactly this moment. "A photographer named Lorenzo," he said slowly. "Yes." "Who you never mentioned before?" "Because there was nothing to mention. He's a work colleague." "Jesus, Ryan, are you seriously doing this? Are you seriously standing here accusing me of something because of one text message?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking a question." "No, you're interrogating me. You're being paranoid and jealous and controlling." The deflection was textbook. Turn the accusation around. Make him the bad guy for asking. Make him doubt his own perceptions. When a liar calls you paranoid, that's how they buy time. "I'm not being paranoid," Ryan said quietly. "I'm being observant. You're different. You've been different since the gala. Late nights, new clothes, constantly on your phone, and now secret messages from someone I've never heard of. What am I supposed to think?" "You're supposed to trust me." Her voice cracked with perfectly calibrated emotion. "We've been married for 9 years, Ryan. 9 years. And you're going to throw that away because of some insecurity?" "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm asking my wife to be honest with me." "I am being honest." She was crying now, real tears streaming down her face. "But you don't believe me. You've already decided I'm guilty of something. You've already made up your mind." Ryan wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her so badly, wanted to accept the explanation, trust the tears, go back to pretending everything was fine. But the architect in him, the part that understood structures and foundations and load-bearing walls, knew better. The cracks weren't healing, they were spreading. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'm sorry. You're right, I'm being paranoid." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I know work has been crazy and I've been distant, but it's just stress. It's not about us. I love you." She hugged him, and he hugged her back, feeling the familiar shape of her body against his, smelling the unfamiliar perfume in her hair. "I love you too," he said. But the words felt hollow, like reading from a script neither of them believed anymore. That night, after Elena fell asleep, Ryan lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing beside him. Elle wasn't Lorenzo, the photographer. Elle was Langford. He knew it with the same certainty he knew which beams could hold weight and which would collapse under pressure. But knowing and proving were different things. So he did what any architect would do when faced with a structure of uncertain integrity. He started looking for the weak points. The confirmation came on a Thursday afternoon, delivered quietly by someone Ryan had worked with for 6 years. Mark Chen was a project manager at the firm, one of the few people Ryan genuinely liked in the corporate maze of Langford Group. Mid-40s, pragmatic, the kind of guy who cut through bullshit and dealt in facts. They'd shared countless late nights reviewing blueprints, solving structural problems, and occasionally commiserating over beers about the politics of working for a man like Daniel Langford. Mark approached Ryan in the parking garage as they were both leaving for the day. 5:15, late enough that most people had cleared out, early enough that it didn't look suspicious. "Hey, Ryan, got a second?" Ryan stopped halfway to his car. Something in Mark's tone made his stomach tighten. "Yeah, what's up?" Mark glanced around, confirming they were alone. "Listen, I don't know if this is my place, and maybe I should just stay out of it, but..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Just say it." "I saw Elena last Thursday, after the late meeting about the harbor project. She left with Langford." The world tilted slightly. Ryan forced his voice to stay steady. "Left with him how?" "They walked out together, got into his car, the black Mercedes. I was heading to my car and saw them. They didn't see me. I thought maybe they were going to a client dinner or something, but..." Mark hesitated. "The way they were together, man. The body language. It didn't look professional." "Did you see where they went?" "No, I didn't follow them. But Ryan, I think there's something going on. I'm sorry. I thought you should know. Ryan nodded slowly, processing. How long? How long do you think this has been happening? I don't know. This is the first time I've seen anything directly. But there's been talk. Quiet talk. People notice things. The way they look at each other in meetings. How she always volunteers for projects he's heading. Small things. I've been trying to tell myself it's nothing, but after last Thursday, Mark shook his head. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. You deserve to know. Thanks, Ryan said, the word automatic, disconnected from any actual gratitude. I appreciate you telling me. What are you going to do? Ryan unlocked his car. I don't know yet. That was a lie. He knew exactly what he was going to do. That evening, Ryan told Elena he had a late meeting about the new convention center project. She barely looked up from her phone, just nodded, and said she'd probably be asleep by the time he got home. Instead of going to a meeting, Ryan drove to the Oasis Club, Langford's private retreat. It was a members-only establishment on the west side of the city, the kind of place where businessmen made deals over cigars and expensive scotch, where indiscretions were protected by discretion and loyalty bought with exclusivity. Langford had brought Ryan there once, years ago, after closing a major contract. You've earned this, he'd said, as if access to leather chairs and aged whiskey was the pinnacle of achievement. Ryan had been uncomfortable the whole night. The place reeked of old money and older entitlement. Now he parked across the street, tucked behind a delivery van that provided cover, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. At 6:47, Langford's black Mercedes pulled into the club's parking lot. Langford got out, checked his watch, straightened his tie. 3 minutes later, another car arrived. A silver Audi. Elena's car. Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Elena got out, looking around nervously, and hurried toward the entrance. She was wearing the black dress, the one she'd worn to the gala, the one that had started all of this. Her hair was down. She'd reapplied her makeup. Langford was waiting just inside the door, though Ryan could see them through the glass. Langford smiling, taking her hand, leading her deeper into the club, his hand settling on her back in that familiar, possessive gesture. The door closed behind them. Ryan sat in his car and felt something inside him crystallize. Not anger, not yet. Anger burns fast, consumes itself, leaves only ash. This was something colder, something patient. This was calculation. He waited. Minutes turned into an hour. An hour turned into 2. He watched cars come and go, watched the sun set and streetlights flicker on, watched the world continue moving while his life froze in place. At 9:30, they emerged. Elena's hair was different, messier, hastily fixed. Langford's tie was loosened. They stood in the parking lot talking for a few minutes, standing too close, her hand on his chest, his hand cradling her face. Then they kissed. Not a quick kiss, not an accident. A long, deep, deliberate kiss that left no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation. Ryan watched through the windshield and felt nothing. That was the most frightening part. He thought he'd feel rage, or heartbreak, or the desperate urge to storm across the street and rip them apart. But he felt nothing, just cold, clear, perfect clarity. They separated. Elena got in her car and drove away. Langford watched her go, smiling like a man who'd just won something valuable, then got in his Mercedes and drove in the opposite direction. Ryan sat in the silence of his car for another 10 minutes, letting the scene replay in his mind, burning it into memory. Then he started his engine and drove home. Elena was already there when he arrived, fresh from another shower, wearing pajamas, curled up on the couch watching television like nothing had happened. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "Productive," Ryan said. "That's good." He went upstairs without another word, got into bed fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Anger burns fast. Revenge, though? Revenge needs to simmer. And Ryan had just set the pot on low heat. Ryan went to work the next morning like nothing had changed, because in the visible world, nothing had. He was still the senior architect, still the trusted lieutenant in Daniel Langford's empire, still the man who turned visions into concrete and steel. But in the invisible world, the world of intentions and plans and consequences, everything had shifted. Ryan understood something that Langford had forgotten in his arrogance. You don't build an empire without understanding every weakness in its structure. Every load-bearing wall, every point where pressure applied correctly could bring the whole thing crashing down. And Ryan had built Langford's empire, which meant Ryan knew exactly where all the weaknesses were. Over the next 2 weeks, Ryan became invisible. Not absent, that would raise suspicion, but unremarkable. He showed up on time, completed his work competently but not brilliantly, attended meetings, and nodded at appropriate intervals. He became background noise in his own life. No one noticed that he started staying late at the office. No one questioned why he was accessing old project files, reviewing contracts, cross-referencing budgets against invoices. Everyone assumed he was just being thorough. That's what Ryan did. He was the detail guy, the one who checked and double-checked everything. What they didn't realize was what he was checking for. The Langford Group's public image was impeccable. Luxury developments, award-winning designs, philanthropic donations. Daniel Langford was treated like a visionary in the business press, a man who transformed the city's skyline and created thousands of jobs. But public images are facades, and Ryan was an architect. He knew all about facades. He knew, for instance, about the Brighton Towers project 3 years ago. Beautiful building, 40 stories of luxury condos, sold out before construction even finished. He also knew that the permits had been expedited through bribes to city officials, that inspections had been falsified, that corners had been cut in ways that didn't threaten structural integrity but certainly violated building codes and ethical standards. Ryan had documentation, emails between Langford and the permit office coordinator, invoices for consulting fees that were clearly bribes dressed in corporate language, inspection reports that had been altered. He'd known about it at the time, had raised concerns. Langford had dismissed them with a smile and a hand on the shoulder. Sometimes we have to grease wheels to get things moving, Ryan. It's business. Don't worry about it. Ryan had worried about it, but he'd also stayed quiet. Because that's what you did when you wanted to keep your career, when you wanted to stay in the inner circle, when you valued your position more than your principles. He wasn't proud of that, but he was grateful for it now, because he'd kept copies of everything. Then there was the Meridian Hotel renovation, the same hotel where the gala had been held, where Ryan's marriage had started its public collapse. Langford's firm had done the structural work 2 years ago. Beautiful job. But the invoices told an interesting story. Double billing. Materials that were charged to the Meridian project but actually used on other developments. Subcontractors who were paid full rate but only did partial work, with Langford pocketing the difference. Insurance fraud, essentially. Dressed up in legitimate-looking paperwork but fraudulent at the core. Ryan had signed some of those invoices. Not the fraudulent ones. Langford had been careful to keep him at arm's length from the actual crime. But Ryan had signed adjacent documents, had been part of the project, could testify to the irregularities if needed, and then there was the personal loan. 6 months ago, Langford had taken out a substantial loan, $750,000, using the company as collateral. Not illegal per se, but the board hadn't approved it. The shareholders didn't know about it. The money had gone into Langford's personal account and been used for... what? Ryan had traced some of it. Gambling debts, a beach house in the Caribbean, a wine collection, none of it business-related, all of it fraudulent use of company assets. Ryan had access to the financial records because he reviewed project budgets. He'd noticed the discrepancy, done some digging, and found the money trail. At the time, he'd filed it away as troubling, but not his problem. Now it was ammunition. Over those 2 weeks, Ryan built a case the way he'd build a structure, methodically, carefully, with attention to every detail and every supporting element. He compiled emails, he copied financial records, he saved invoices and contracts and inspection reports. He documented everything in multiple locations, encrypted cloud storage, physical copies in a safety deposit box, copies sent to his personal lawyer with instructions to release them if anything happened to him. He wasn't just collecting evidence, he was building a weapon, and on the 15th day, he loaded that weapon and aimed it directly at Daniel Langford's empire. Ryan resigned on a Tuesday morning. He walked into Langford's office at 9:15, closed the door behind him, and placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. Langford looked up from his computer, surprised. "Ryan, what's this?" "My resignation, effective immediately." Langford stared at the paper, then at Ryan, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to something that looked almost like concern. "What? Why? Did something happen?" "I've decided it's time to move on." "Move on?" Langford stood up, came around the desk with that practiced charm, that ability to make you feel like you were the only person in the world who mattered. "Ryan, you're one of my most valuable people. Whatever this is about, we can work it out. Is it money? Because we can absolutely discuss a raise. I should have done it months ago." "It's not about money." "Then what? A better offer?" "Because I can match it. I can exceed it. You're too important to this company to lose over compensation." Ryan looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd praised him publicly, who'd given him opportunities, who'd stood at a podium and called him the foundation of his empire. This man who'd stolen his wife and didn't even have the decency to show guilt. "It's personal," Ryan said. "I need to make a change." Langford's eyes narrowed slightly. That shark instinct, sensing something beneath the surface. "Personal? I see. This wouldn't have anything to do with Elena, would it?" The name hung in the air between them. Ryan kept his expression neutral. "What would Elena have to do with my career decisions?" "Nothing. Of course nothing." But Langford was watching him carefully now, calculating. "I just want to make sure you're not making an emotional decision you'll regret." "I won't regret it." "Ryan." Langford put his hand on Ryan's shoulder, the same gesture he'd used 100 times before. Paternal, possessive. "You're making a mistake. The market is tough right now. Walking away from a position like this, from the security and prestige of the Langford Group, you'll come crawling back within 6 months, and I might not be able to take you back." Ryan removed Langford's hand from his shoulder, gently but firmly. "I won't be crawling back," he said quietly. "Good luck with everything." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Langford standing there, confused and faintly irritated, but ultimately unconcerned. Because men like Daniel Langford didn't worry about losing employees. There were always more. Always someone hungry, someone ambitious, someone willing to compromise their principles for a corner office and a 6-figure salary. Ryan had been one of those people once, not anymore. He cleaned out his desk, said polite goodbyes to colleagues who seemed genuinely sorry to see him go, and left the building by 10 o'clock. By 10:30, he was sitting in a coffee shop across from the Federal Building, meeting with Detective Sarah Morrison from the White Collar Crime Division. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, shaking his hand, "your lawyer said you have information about corporate fraud at the Langford Group?" "I have documentation of multiple instances of fraud, bribery, falsified inspection reports, double billing, and unauthorized use of company assets for personal gain," Ryan said. He slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything is on here. Emails, financial records, contracts, invoices, enough to build a case." Morrison picked up the drive, examining it. "This is substantial. Why are you bringing this to us now?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Ryan said simply. That was partly true, but mostly it was because revenge dressed as justice felt cleaner than revenge dressed as revenge. Morrison nodded slowly. "We'll need you to testify. This will become public. Your name will be associated with the investigation." "I understand." "And you'll likely never work in this industry again. People don't forget whistleblowers." "I'm aware of the consequences." "Okay, then." She pocketed the flash drive. "We'll be in touch. This might take a few weeks to review and build the case, but if everything you're saying is accurate..." She smiled grimly. "Mr. Langford is going to have a very bad year." Ryan left the meeting feeling lighter than he had in months. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a local news station and requested a meeting with their investigative journalism team. By 3 that afternoon, he was sitting across from veteran reporter Marcus Chen, handing over copies of the same documentation. "Why give this to the press?" Marcus asked. "Because I want everyone to know," Ryan said. "Not just the authorities. Everyone. His clients, his investors, his shareholders, the people who trusted him with their money and their projects. They deserve to know who they're doing business with." Marcus Chen smiled. "This is going to be a hell of a story." By 6 p.m., the story broke. Not the full investigation. That would take time. But enough. Enough to plant seeds of doubt. Enough to make investors nervous. Enough to put Daniel Langford's name in the same sentence as under investigation and corporate fraud. The headline on the evening news: Langford Group under federal investigation for corporate fraud and bribery. By 7 p.m., Langford's phone was ringing off the hook. Investors demanding answers. Board members calling emergency meetings. Lawyers scrambling to contain the damage. By 8 p.m., the company's stock had dropped 12%. By 9 p.m., Daniel Langford's carefully constructed empire had begun to crack, and Ryan sat in his car, watching the news on his phone, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He'd pulled the first pillar. Now he just had to wait for the structure to collapse. The collapse was beautiful in its inevitability. Within 48 hours of Ryan's revelations going public, the federal investigation went from exploratory to aggressive. Search warrants were executed, financial records were seized, employees were questioned. The offices of the Langford Group were swarmed by agents in dark suits carrying boxes of documents out to waiting trucks. The press had a field day. Every news outlet ran the story. Daniel Langford's face appeared on screen after screen, accompanied by words like fraud, corruption, investigation. The man who'd been treated like a visionary architect was now being painted as a common criminal. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Langford was suspended pending the investigation's outcome. His salary was frozen. His assets, both personal and corporate, were seized as potential evidence. The luxury lifestyle he'd built on other people's trust evaporated overnight. The beach house, the wine collection, the expensive cars, all frozen, untouchable. Evidence in a criminal case. Investors pulled out en masse. Projects were canceled. Contracts were terminated. Partners who'd been loyal for years suddenly remembered they'd always had concerns about Langford's ethics. That's the thing about empires built on image. When the image cracks, there's nothing underneath to hold them up. The city council launched their own investigation into the bribes and falsified permits. The building commissioner resigned. 2 city officials were arrested. The web spread wider and wider, touching everyone who'd ever profited from Langford's corruption. And through it all, Daniel Langford maintained his innocence, held press conferences where he claimed he was being persecuted, insisted this was all a misunderstanding, blamed former employees, Ryan specifically, for fabricating evidence out of spite. No one believed him, because the documentation was airtight. The evidence was overwhelming, and Ryan had been careful, so careful, to only present facts that could be verified and corroborated. You can't charm your way out of your own emails. 2 weeks after the investigation began, Ryan's phone rang. Elena. He hadn't spoken to her since the resignation. She'd tried calling repeatedly those first few days, left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to desperate. He'd ignored all of them. This time he answered. Ryan. Her voice was thick with tears. Please, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. Yes, there is. This is insane. What you did to Daniel, it's insane. Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed him. You've destroyed everything. I exposed fraud. That's what I did. You did it because of me, because of us. You're punishing him for something that wasn't even his fault. I pursued him, Ryan. It was my choice. I know it was your choice. Ryan's voice was calm, almost gentle. That's why I'm not punishing you. I'm just letting you live with your choices. What does that even mean? It means you chose a man who builds his empire on lies and corruption. You chose power over integrity. You chose him over me. And now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. Ryan, please, I know I hurt you. I know what I did was wrong. But this is too much. He's losing everything. Can't you just stop? Can't you just let this go? Let it go? Ryan laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Elena, I'm not doing anything except telling the truth. The authorities are doing their job. The justice system is working exactly the way it's supposed to. If Langford is losing everything, it's because everything he had was built on fraud. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know about any of that. I swear, Ryan, I didn't know. Doesn't matter if you knew or not. You still chose him. I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. Can we please just talk? Just see each other and talk? There's nothing left to say. Ryan, you chose a man who builds towers on lies. I build them on truth. That's the difference between us. That's always been the difference. He could hear her crying through the phone. Part of him, a small, dying part, felt sorry for her. For the woman he'd loved, who'd destroyed their marriage chasing something that was never real, but most of him felt nothing. I have to go, he said. Wait, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you. Please don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Elena. I just told the truth. If you have a problem with the consequences, maybe you should have thought about that before you fucked my boss. He hung up. She called back immediately. He declined the call. She called again. He blocked her number. 2 days later, she showed up at his apartment. He saw her through the peephole, standing in the hallway, eyes red from crying, looking small and desperate. He didn't open the door. She knocked for 5 minutes, calling his name, begging him to let her in, to just talk to her, to give her a chance to explain. He sat on his couch, reading a book, and waited for her to leave. Eventually, she did. 3 weeks after the investigation began, Daniel Langford was formally indicted on 17 counts of fraud, bribery, and corruption. His bail was set at $2 million. He posted it, but it cleaned out what was left of his accessible accounts. The man who'd once commanded rooms with his presence now looked diminished, aged. The silver hair seemed grayer. The confident posture had slouched into something defensive. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out, and a week after the indictment, Ryan heard through mutual contacts that Elena had left Langford. Apparently, being with a powerful man was exciting. Being with a disgraced criminal facing decades in prison was less so. She'd returned to her parents' house 3 states away. No job, no prospects, no husband, no lover, just the consequences of her choices. Ryan heard the news and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even pity. Just nothing. Because he'd already moved on. While Langford's empire was crumbling, Ryan had started building something new. 4 months after Ryan walked out of the Langford Group offices for the last time, he stood in front of a small building on the east side of the city. Nothing fancy, nothing corporate, just a renovated warehouse with high ceilings, natural light, and potential. A sign hung above the door. Caldwell Architecture, Ryan's own firm. Small, independent, built on integrity instead of corruption. He'd taken 3 clients with him from the Langford Group. People who valued his work and his honesty more than they valued association with a big-name firm. They'd been enough to get started, to pay rent and hire 2 junior architects who were hungry and talented and shared Ryan's philosophy of doing things right, even when it was harder. The work was challenging, the hours were long, the profit margins were thin, but it was his, built on his terms, with his values, and it felt more solid than anything he'd built in 12 years at the Langford Group. The trial had come and gone. Daniel Langford had been convicted on 14 of the 17 counts, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison plus massive fines and restitution payments. The Langford Group declared bankruptcy 2 weeks after the verdict. The company was dissolved, assets sold off to pay creditors, and restitution to the victims of the fraud. The towers that bore Langford's name were being renamed. The legacy he'd spent decades building was being erased, one press release at a time. Ryan had testified at the trial, spent 2 days on the witness stand explaining the fraud, corroborating the documents, answering questions from both prosecutors and defense attorneys. Langford had stared at him from the defense table the entire time, not with anger, but with something that looked almost like confusion, like he couldn't understand how the loyal employee he'd relied on for 12 years had become the instrument of his destruction. Ryan had stared back, completely calm, because he'd done nothing wrong. He'd simply told the truth. If that truth destroyed a man, perhaps the man shouldn't have built his life on lies. Elena had tried contacting him once more, about a month after the trial ended. An email this time, instead of a call. Long, rambling, full of apologies and regrets and explanations about how she'd been confused, how Langford had manipulated her, how she'd realized too late that Ryan was the one she should have valued. Ryan had read it once, then deleted it. Not out of anger, just out of indifference. She was part of his past now. A chapter that had closed. Trying to reopen it would be pointless. He'd filed for divorce 3 weeks after his resignation. It had been finalized 2 months ago. Clean, simple. No fault, because proving adultery would have required energy he didn't want to spend. He'd kept the apartment, some furniture, and his freedom. She'd kept her regret. Now, 6 months after everything had started falling apart, Ryan stood on the balcony of his new office, looking out at the city he'd helped shape, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness felt too simple, too naive for what he'd been through. But peace. The quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd done the right thing, that he'd chosen integrity over comfort, that he'd built something new from the ruins of something old. His phone buzzed. A text from one of his new clients, confirming a meeting about a residential project. Nothing massive, just a family home. But it was honest work, clean work, work he could be proud of. Ryan pocketed his phone and went back inside. There were blueprints to review, designs to finalize, a business to build. He'd lost a wife who didn't value him. He'd lost a career built on someone else's corruption. He'd lost years of his life serving a man who'd stolen from him. But he'd gained something more important. He'd gained himself back. And sometimes that's the only kind of balance that matters. That's the only kind of victory worth having. Daniel Langford had taken Ryan's wife. So Ryan had taken everything else. His empire, his reputation, his freedom, his legacy. And in the end, when you build your kingdom on lies, it doesn't matter how high the towers rise. Eventually, someone pulls out the foundation, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Ryan had been that someone, and he'd sleep just fine knowing it.